Hi, my name is Paul Arnold and I'm a qualified psychotherapist and trained coach. And today I want to talk about managing aging. And I always remember there's a great film with Al Pacino in, and he had a great line in the changing room at half time where he said, I can't do his accent, so I apologise. He said, and lately I can't even stand the face I see in the mirror. When you get old in life, things get taken from you, and that's just part of life. But you only learn that when you start losing stuff. You find out that life is a game of inches. And I think that sums a lot of stuff up. We look at ourselves in the mirror and think, oh my God, is that me now? But inside your body feels like very different. You feel much younger. So how old do you see yourself to really be? I still see myself to be in my 40s. But also our body is speaking to us. We're much more engaged with our body, because when we get up, I've got a hip problem at present, and so it's speaking to me very loud and clear, that I've got to take it a little bit more easy in the boat. But look, there's an inevitability about this. It happens to every single one of us, and it's up to us to be able to grasp that and move on. So let's talk a bit about some of the sort of theoretical principles that we often talk about within the psychotherapy room. There's something about, whilst I'm not sitting here saying you shouldn't try to hold on to where you are, there is also a degree of recognition that you're not letting go. And we do need to in some ways let go of a past to allow us to embrace the fullness of the new future. And I really appreciate that, we have major shifts in our identity, because maybe we're a full-time mother, a father of a young child, and now we become empty nesters, or we were very much defined by our role within a work, and maybe that work is gone, so therefore, who are we now? And in many ways, this becomes a real freer space, because then you come back to be more you. Because particularly in that parenthood stage or the workspace, you are, someone else's person. And now you have the chance to become you, your full, authentic, true self. And then there's, a recognition of the grieving process. And I won't go into too much of the grieving process because I've done a video about that. But I think a critical part of the grieving is the letting go, but also is about a celebrating. It's a celebrating of what was so good about certain stages, and now they are no more. Because that's a way of letting go of it, to honour it, respect it, and then you can then move on. And let's be quite frank, each era has its pros and cons. We may look back with, rose-tinted spectacles at being 20 and in our teens, but, we're full of neuroses there. There was no financial things there. We were still finding our way through relationships. So in many ways, that had great things and had bad things, much like as this period in your life will have good things and bad things. And to recognise everything has its pros and cons. And clearly there's a lot of fear attached, particularly, let's be quite frank, the fear of the ultimate, thing that is going to happen to all of us. But there's all those smaller fears, which I'll come on to in a little while as well. And I think it's really important we get a reframe going on. We've got to change the way we look at things. So in other words, we've got to see the future less in the negative and more in the positive. Otherwise, you're just going to live in a pretty miserable space. And I think we've got to really focus on what is really important in life. I remember the great author and management guru Stephen Covey, 7 Habits book, talked in one video I saw of him. He talked about, if you were in a war-torn country, as we're horribly seeing in the world right now, and you had to leave your home within the next 40 minutes, what would you take? And we know that only things we'd take some pictures, we'd take the family, we may take the pets, everything else is irrelevant. So there's something about recognizing what is really important. And I think what becomes very, very clear in that space is relationships is everything. Everything else is just supplementary nice icing on top of the cake, but it's not the fundamentally important stuff. So therefore it gives us a chance to really focus on the relationships and building the quality of those relationships. It's a bit of a cliche, 50s are the new 40s, la 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 la, but I think an age is, to a degree, is a mindset. It's not totally a mindset, but I do think there's something about just remember the glass is still half full. It's not completely empty. And even you see these wonderful people who are 90 years old who are still having a great thing. I had a great opportunity years and years ago, and I was doing some sort of charity work. I'm not trying to boast, but I was in Hawaii and I was in Pearl Harbor, and I went to an old people's home. We were meeting people who had been there at the time. And I said, what's the gift you can give me? And they said, sort of make the most of today. And I think there is a great truth within that. And in terms of existentialism, the thing we learn so much powerfully is the fundamental important need for purpose. Because very often some of the things that gave us purpose in the past, full-time parenthood, full-time role and job, has now moved away. So what is our purpose now? We must find purpose. Else the days are just going to drift and we're just watching blankety blank on TV. And trust me, when you see people who do that, very quickly their life slips away because there is no purpose. So in terms of tips, I think one of the things is you've got to face your fears. I'm going to be alone, I'm going to be broke, I'm going to be dribbling into my napkins, etc., etc. And you know what, in reality, most of those are not going to come until maybe your very last year. So in other words, you've still got 40 good years or whatever it's going to be for you of living a full and active life. Mark Twain once said, I've had many disasters in my life, very few of which have ever come true. So there's something about face the catastrophe and then realize it ain't going to be as bad as that, and we just need to learn, how to address those when some of those things do come along. And I said, have purpose, find a new purpose in life, learn something new. It's never too late to pick up an instrument or, learn a new skill or something like that, And I think there's another exercise I often sort of do, get people to do what I call a reframe, is what I call looking forward to look back. So if you think about it, when you were 20, you were full of your neurosis or whatever was going on with you. And when you're 30, you say, oh my God, I didn't realize what was so good about that stuff. And then when you are in your 30s, you're caught up in, young children, high outgoing costs, trying to push your career, whatever happens to be. And you're so stuck in that. And when you get to 40, you say, my God, you didn't realize how good it was for you then. And likewise, when you get into your 50s or whatever, and there's something about go forward 10 years and look back to make you realize that you've just got to make the most of what there is now. So just get out there, enjoy the moment, as they say. And I think there is also a need to readjust expectations. So as some of you know, I'm a very keen sort of rower. I get on the ergo machine 3 times a week and my scores have gone progressively down. But the reality is I'm still out there doing it, okay? And I'm still trying to do a good score based on where I am now. And that ain't where I was before. But I'm still out there, And I think if you do that, you sort of reduce frustration. I'm no longer expecting to go and, beat a crew. I'll tell you a real thing happened the other week. It was the head of the river race. There was a crew made up of ex-Olympians and they raced and they came 2 minutes behind the younger crews. So these are ex-Olympians. So therefore time made a big difference. They were still incredibly strong, still incredibly talented, but still time had made the most difference. And I think you've got to keep pushing yourself within the limits of your own possibilities and just don't give up. Just keep on going. Now, how can psychotherapy help? Well, I think it can help you to really let go and move on. And I think to really fully embrace the new stage within your life. I think, every stage has some beauty within it, and I think we need to make the most of that. Anyway, I hope that was of use. Take care. Live long.